Welcome to Gunnar Weiskamp's Web Development. Today we're back into Angular and we're going to do lesson 16. We're going to be calling a web API via AngularJS. So yeah, as A says there, today we will look at how you can call a web API using AngularJS. Okay, so I just repeated myself. Anyway, so let's to create today's app, the first steps, I'm using Visual Studio 2013. Just go to File, New Project, as shown here in A, and then in B, make sure those items are selected. In C, you want an empty app with nothing down here selected, just a completely empty app. That's it. Okay, right. So let's go into Visual Studio. Right, so here we have our empty app. What are we going to do first? First, we're going to add Angular. Seems like a good plan. Seems like a good plan. So to do that, so right click, click on Manage NuGet Packages, this guy, because this downloader allows you to inject certain dependencies that your application needs, and in our case, that's going to be Angular. And this is the type of Angular that we're going to install, so just click Install. And on the right here you'll see it'll create a certain scripts folder for you to use. You might notice while it's doing this, we can see it's downloading a certain version of Angular. Angular obviously, it comes in many different versions, and you've got to watch out for writing certain code in Angular, because at times you might use an old technique which is not supported by, say, this version of Angular, and that can cause you a bit of a headache sometimes, because you don't know what's going wrong, but it's the type of version of Angular that you've actually got is no longer working with the type of Angular code that you're writing, so you've got to look out for those things. So on our right here, we can see all these Angular lovely files coming up. And that's it, it's all done. Now we're going to add our Angular file, or our JavaScript file, sorry. And in that we're going to write all our Angular code. So it should be popping up in there in 2 seconds. While that's going along, I'm going to grab all our Angular code from my demo area. Oops. Okay, so here's also already my app, which is now, so this is obviously being placed in also here in our scripts folder, as we can see. So this is the my JavaScript file in which we are putting our Angular code, and we're going to use that code obviously. Okay, we'll talk about code after we've done a few more bits of magic. Next, let's add a HTML file. So you might want to type that code in. You can put it on pause, but I'm just going to add the HTML file here. It doesn't really matter what name it's got. While that's doing that, I'm going to grab the HTML code. Here's all our HTML code, but again, I will talk about that at a later stage. If I'm correct, that's it for our Angular side of things. That's all the code we need for the client Angular side of things. Now we're going to build our web API, and to do that, we're going to add new project. and just make sure that's these items here are selected. So this is, you could say this is the, you can call it whatever you want, I guess, API app. Okay, yep. And now in here it's important, we're going to do a select empty one, but we need web API support, so make sure that's selected. While that's doing that, I'm going to grab some magical code from our web API area. Okay, let me grab this code here for a start. Now we're back into our application. At least I thought we were. It's still adding our new project. For those new to API, I do have a tutorial just based around APIs, so feel free to watch them. I'll briefly touch on some components in our API area here. So one of the components we'll mention at this stage is this area here. When we are making this API, we put in the API support, and more or less a big part of the magic or item that's added is this API routing process. The main things here from a beginner's perspective is to look at this area, and also you might notice if you're not new to MVC, if you used MVC before, you'll find all this quite simple. What we're going to have to do is, this is telling us where to do and get our code in our API. In other words, we're going to create an API folder in our solution here. Let's close that down, and then we're going to add a controller to that, and then obviously in the controller you can create a function, and then you can pass parameters, just like in an MVC application. So this is the main part of code that this web API gives you, and that you've got to look for. So let's create this API folder. You can call it something else, but then you would have to change this folder name here as well. Add new folder, but as you can imagine, it's for other developers, it's always good to keep to conventions, so it's easy to understand where everything is at. So now we're going to add a controller in this API, just like MVC, more or less. But this controller is going to be a web API 2 controller, not an MVC controller. And what are we going to call this one? What have I called mine over here? I want to try to keep the name conventions the same. Username controller, right? Okay. So I'll point out one of the main differences between a web API and a MVC controller. Mostly it's the web API does inherit from a different base class. And that different base class is this guy here, API controller, while MVC obviously just inherits from the controller class. So we've already copied some code which we're going to stick in. And like I said before, I'll talk about the code all in one hit. I'd prefer to do that rather than talk about it all in bits and pieces. We also need to add a model in. What are we going to call that? Model. We're going to call it user data model. So let's do that. So just briefly see, you'll probably see in this web API project here that it's got a lot of similarities between MVC. So you've got your models controller, but you don't have that views folder because obviously Web API is meant to be non-graphical. It's not meant to show you an interface in that sense. Let's put some code in our model here. And let's grab stuff here. Wonderful. So now let's so we're back here in this guy here. Let's bring in our model space. Our models folder. So we're bringing this folder here, so it can now see these components of this model item here. So this is all getting close to being ready to be used. Now we get into some key differences between calling a web API using Angular and a web API using normal MVC. You might notice this enable CORS thing here. It's red, it's not working. And one of the important things is we have to enable and put in certain processes in place in this web API for Angular to use it, or a JavaScript language like jQuery to call this web API. If you had a normal MVC app down here calling this API, you would not have to put in this support to do that. They're special libraries, and we're going to do that right now. Those libraries are, I've got to just remember them, Microsoft ASP.NET Web API. Oh, let's look for that then. Okay, so just like before, we're going to get the NuGet package manager. There he is. So we have to inject these packages into our Web API area here, so that this Web API can be called by JavaScript frameworks, if that makes any sense. And you might see here there's a number of dependencies, so this will not just install this process here, but it will install these dependencies as well. So yeah, so this, what I'm doing here, you only have to do if you're calling a web API, this type of web API, using Angular or jQuery. Part of the process is here, over on my left, you might notice if I'm pointing out here, this localhost area, this is what you can consider a domain. This is connected onto our, I can't close it. This is, you have to tell the API who can call it and who has permissions to use it. And this domain here, this local host, is related to this area down here. This is this guy's domain. Just look at it like that. So you're saying, okay, this guy here, his localhost 62479 has the permissions to use the code here in the web API. And that's one of the differences that you need to do when calling a web API using a JavaScript language. So, okay, we've installed all our supports for web API. Let's just close that. Right. Is there something else missing here? Obviously there is. Let me go back to my example code. Just a namespace that's obviously missing. So if we go into, so one of the namespaces here is missing. So this, in this namespace whole, is the enabled CORS attribute. So I do, well, I won't talk about code yet, I'm sort of mumbling now. we've got one more piece of code to add, and that's in this guy, and then I'll talk about code. Right, okay, let's grab that piece of code. Important. Alright, let's talk about code. Okay. First, let's just talk about the code that is in our client area. So we've got a HTML page. Split. Whoa. Okay, not perfect. Right, this is what I want to show. So in our client area, we've got two bits of code. We've got our HTML page, and we've got our Angular folder here in our scripts folder, as I mentioned before. Let's talk about what they're doing. First of all, this application, all we're going to do is we've got a text box here. We're going to say, please enter your username, and then click on submit to get the related password for that username. So you're going to enter your username in this text box. Just say Mary is the username. And then once you've entered that, you're going to click this button here, and this will be the submit button, and it's going to call this Angular function here, which is over here. On the return, when this returns, this expression here will receive the username of our test user, which is going to be Mary. So the password will end up in this Angular expression area here. So now let's talk about the Angular file. As I mentioned, when we click submit, we go into this Angular function. It's being passed this username via the ng model process here. So here we are in our Angular file. We've created two variables. We're obviously injecting the scope and the HTTP services. So the main process is here in our get user password, passing it the username, which in our example will be Mary. Then we're calling the HTTP service. Now, important, the URL. This is going to be the web API URL, and you can see we're calling the API folder that we created in our API. We're calling the controller, which is username controller, and we're calling the actual function within that controller, which is get user password. Let's have a look at that quickly. It's our get user password. So those are the key steps in our Angular process. We're also passing here the parameters. That's very important. This guy goes here first, and this is the parameter here in our function. So that's an important piece of code there. And we also have to say what method it's going to be, and it's going to be a get method. And then obviously we have the then keyword process from our response. If our response is successful, we're passing the data object in our response object back to this user password, which ends up over here. Magic. So that's our client-side code. It's important that you get the number of your API. You might be wondering how to do that. You right-click on your solution, you go to Properties. Obviously you can build your app too, and then it'll show you the pipe there. And I think it's in web. Is it in web? Yeah, there it is. That's where you get that magical API number. Whatever, it could be different in yours. So technically, I need to copy and paste that in there. But I won't do that, not for this example. Just to tell you where that number is generated from. Okay, so now let's look at our API code. Obviously, we added all those NuGet packages and the support for that. We created first a user data model. Just like an MVC, this model represents the information that we're transporting and using in our process. Oh, excuse me, I just sneezed. On air. Anyway, so this is just our model. so it's pretty straightforward stuff. If we look at the next process, I did mention briefly here with Web APIs. I won't go around this process again, but this guy here is important to add if you're referencing an API via a JavaScript framework like Angular, because it enables this cause attribute to work, and that has to go, in this case, in the register area. So the main magic, or the main mechanics of our Web API is going to be handled here in our controller. And this enable cause, to explain a little bit further, like I said, you have to give permission to the, when you're using JavaScript calls, you have to give permission to the actual app that's calling it. And in this case, this guy has to align to this guy. And again, to get that number, what you do is you right click on that one, you go properties, and you go into web, and then you find that number. So that number there should be here. So you're giving permissions to this project here, or this domain, to use your application. When you're uploading this to live, all you do is replace that with the domain name instead of the localhost area. I won't talk too much about this headers attribute. This one here is can be important and pretty easy to explain. That just means the methods that you're going to allow this application to do in this controller. So this enable cause is done at the controller level. So whatever function you can do in here, you're doing it here. You've made the methods and the permissions at control level. In here, we're saying, with the methods, we're saying you can do anything in here. You can do it. You can call any action. You can call a get action. You can call a delete action, a put action, whatever you want. If you just want to limit it to get actions, you can put in there get. But for our purposes, we're putting in the asterisk, and that means you can do any action here. A get, a delete, an update, whatever you want. So that's an important parameter to talk about with the enable cause attribute. Now, once we dive into our actual code of our Web API, it's pretty standard. Let's tidy that up a bit. It's pretty standard MVC code, C# code. All this is a get action. We've got our username here. We're passing the username. So if this username equals Mary, as we said before, what we're going to do, we've got this list object here as an example. Obviously, you'd go to a database, do a database call rather than going through this object here. But what we're doing in here is we're going to check this object here for the username that's passed. So if we pass Mary in to this username, we're checking this object for the username Mary, and we're trying to get that password out here. And that password should end up in our result object here. Let's tidy this up. So in other words, if we pass in Mary, this should equal my password Mary. And then we return this, and returning via these sort of calls, do return it and try use this JSON action result. And I've got dynamic here. And as you can see, we've got the result. And from that, we're just passing back the password of the user, because that's what this application was meant to do. Remember, we're passing the password back to the user. So that's a lot. That's a big mouthful. So now we just got to build our application. We'll save that. Whoops. So if I refresh that, and now I put in Mary, can I just maybe, if I show that with the code, sometimes it's good to, oops, a daisy, no, I didn't want to do that. Show that. Yeah, okay, right. So here's our window. So if we type in here Mary and we press submit, so we're using this interface here on my left, this HTML, as you can see. This HTML is here in our window, and you can see we're putting in our user name of Mary. So let's click submit. This should communicate here in our API area, and we should get this my password Mary back. Any moment now. There we go. Just a little bit flaky, a little bit slow. We got this my password Mary back. So we know we went into this area. And all the magic happened. So yeah, this is the lesson on calling a web API using Angular. Just remember, the same mechanics can happen if you're using jQuery, so you've got to look out for this sort of issue. But when you're just using normal MVC, a C# or Razor file, you should probably, I believe, not have the issue. Okay. Oh, sorry. So thanks for listening. Hope this was helpful. Please subscribe to my channel, or feel free to visit my website there as well. Thanks. See you guys next time. Bye.